we come to a very, very interesting double parsha this week. Tazria-Metzora. And Rashi, in the beginning of the parsha, discusses the connection between our parsha and last week's parsha, Parsha Shemini. The second half of Parsha Shemini talks about the laws of keeping kosher. The kosher animals, non-kosher animals, kosher fish, non-kosher fish, kosher birds, non-kosher birds, kosher insects, not kosher insects. Little known fact that there are species of kosher locusts, kosher grasshoppers. Today they're hard to identify, but there are some who claim we still have a tradition as to which ones are permitted, which ones are prohibited. So last week's parsha is the Torah, says Rashi, of Chaya and Oath. It is the body of law that pertains to animals, birds. Tazria-Metzora is the law that pertains to human beings. It talks about the ritual impurity, which is associated with the yoledes, the childbearing woman. When a woman has a baby, the Torah says she's in a state of ritual impurity for a certain period of time. Then we come to the Metzora. The Metzora is the person who contracts this skin condition called saras. According to Chazal, it really comes as a punishment for the sin of Lashon Hara, but it's a body of law that pertains to the state of the human body. Then at the end of the parsha, we have halachas of various forms of impurity which relate to physical conditions. So this is called the Torah Sa'odam. This is the body of law that pertains to the state of the human body. So there's a sequence. First we talk about animals, then we talk about human beings. So Rashi quotes a statement of Simloi, that in the same way that in the book of Bereshis, in the creation story, animals were created first, and only then human beings. As we know that the animals were created on the 5th and 6th days, man was created at the end of the 6th day. So there's a sequence. First animals, then human beings. So likewise, when the law is elaborated, we follow the same sequence. So the end of Parsha Shemini talks about the law that pertains to animals, and Parsha Tazria-Metzora talks about the law that pertains to human beings. So we have to reflect upon this for a moment. What is this idea that there is this sequence, both in the creation story and in the halacha, of first the laws of animals and then ultimately the laws of human beings? Now the Medrash, Rashi only quotes the beginning of it, but the Medrash goes on and brings a pasuk in Tehillim. And this verse in Tehillim is really a quotation of something that Adam Harishon said, that Adam himself said. And he said, Ochar v'kedem tzartani. You formed me after and before. Meaning there were two acts of creation. We would say before and after. He put it the other way, after and before. So what is this a reference to? The fact that something was created first and something was created last. Most of the Mefarshim understand, and if you look at the Medrash itself, it seems to be, this is really what the Medrash is getting at, is an amazing thing. We know that in the creation story, man was created last. Man was created Friday afternoon, close to Shabbos. But the Medrash says that was only the guf, that was only the body of man. The neshama of man was created on the first day. That's the ochar v'kedem tzartani. You formed me after and before. In other words, in one sense, man is the last thing to have been created. In another sense, man is the first thing to have been created. Because the guf, the body, was created last, and the neshama was created first. That's what the Medrash says. The Medrash continues, and this is to impress upon us the following idea, that if zocha, if a person merits, we tell them, look, you were the first. You were the first thing to have been created. And if he's undeserving, we tell him, Yatush Kadmacha. even the mosquito was created before you. So what's the question? Zacha loy zacha. So if we understand that the achar v'kedem, the after and before, is a reference to the body and the soul, probably means something like this: that there's a tug of war, there's a tension within the human being between the neshama and the guf. What is most important? What is primary? Is a person primarily a body, and the neshama there is to serve the body, to animate the body, to provide direction for the body, but he fundamentally is a body. He lives to eat, he lives to drink, he lives to experience comfort, which are all experiences of the body. He needs a brain to be able to eat well and drink well. In other words, an animal eats grass. If you want to eat fine cuisine, for that you have to have a brain. You have to have a neshama. So a person could live his life in such a way that the neshama is really a servant of the guf, it's a servant of the body. In which case, man is last, on the bottom of the heap. On the other hand, if he lives the other way, that his neshama is of primary importance, and the body is there to serve the neshama, then he can pat himself on the back and say that you're the first. You're the first thing to have been created, because your soul was created first. So this is the question. Zach, the person merits to make his neshama primary, so we can take pride in the fact that he was the first thing to be created. If he is lo zacha and he makes his body primary, then we tell him that you're just last. Even the mosquito, the lowly mosquito, was created before you. Rabbi Eliezer says a different pshat. Rabbi Eliezer says a different pshat in the ochar v'kedem, in the after and before. And again, if you look at the Medrash, you wouldn't walk away with this impression. Rabbi Eliezer says the following pshat: that when a person makes something, first there is the design, there is the planning, and then there is the implementation. Then it is carried out. When we talk about the world, in the L'chadodi, we say every Shabbos, we say Sof Maaseh V'Machshava Tchila. That in the end there was action, but in the beginning there was thought. In the beginning there was design. Things aren't made haphazardly. There's a blueprint, there's a plan, and you design the thing very carefully, and then you carry it out. In the planning stage of a thing, the most important thing is first. Let's say, for example, you are planning a office building. So you're not going to deal with the secondary things first. You'll deal with the primary things first. What is the purpose of this office? What function is it meant to serve? Etc., etc., etc. You'll design the entire building around the primary function of the building. So on the level of machshava, on the level of planning, of design, the most central element is that which is first. On the level of implementation, it may be that the central feature is last. Maybe this is even a better example. Let's say an art museum. The art museum is to showcase the art. But what is the last thing to be installed in the museum? The art. But first you build the building, and you have the corridors and the galleries and the lighting and the systems, the heating, and so on and so forth. Only when everything else is complete, then the curators come in and they put up the paintings, etc. But in the design of the museum, what did the architect have in mind? What will be an appropriate building to showcase the art? The tachlis is to showcase the art. So the whole design revolves around the art. That's sof masav machshava tchila. That's first you have the machshava, in the end you have the masa. The tachlis habriyah, says it Rabbi Eliezer, the objective of creation was man. Man is the tachlis of Ria. Everything comes to serve man. And we talked about this in the past. We mentioned the very, very interesting medrash in the end of Parshas Bereishis, which the Mesilas Yesharim quotes, not in the common edition of the Mesilas Yesharim, but in his first draft, which was written as a debate. He quotes a very famous medrash, which Rashi also quotes, that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu destroyed the world at the time of the Mabul, so there's a question. Okay, the people were wicked, the people deserved punishment. Why did God obliterate the world, the planet? So the medrash gave a mashal. There was once a person who made a wedding, and he made a beautiful spread. The tables are beautifully decorated, laden with food. Everything is set for the wedding. Moments before the ceremony is meant to begin, the groom dies, and that's it, no wedding. So the father of the groom, who had made this very lavish feast, comes in, and he's so distraught, he begins throwing all the tables over, ruining the entire feast. So people come to him and say, listen, I understand you're very upset. We're sorry to hear that the groom died, but this is a good meal. Why are you ruining everything? So he says, I only arranged for this banquet in honor of the wedding. There's no wedding. What's the purpose of the banquet? It's like what HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, that everything that I created was for the sake of man. It's to serve man, to enable man. So if there's going to be a man, then there's a need for a world. But if there's not going to be a man, why do we need a world? So therefore, when the Mabul came, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't only destroy the human beings, he essentially obliterated the face of the world. That's what the Medrash says. Now this is a very, very interesting idea. It's a commonly accepted idea because the Mesilas Yesharim popularized this. But there is another way of looking at it. We could say that everything in the Bria, everything in creation has its own raison d'etre, has its own justification. The plants and the animals and the mountains and the rivers, everything has its own raison d'etre. Man is very important, but he's part of the world. He's not the Ba'koil Mikol Koil of the world. He's not the totality of the world. But the Mesilas Yesharim, based on this medrash, understands that man is central. Man is the pinnacle of creation. Rabbeinu Bachai, in the same vein, says, so therefore, in the planning of the world, in the machshava tchila, in the planning of the world, avada, man was first and foremost. Because if he was the tachlis, if he was the objective, that obviously is what God contemplated first. When it comes to implementation, then as we said in our marshal of the museum, of course, we understand that when it comes to putting it together in a concrete sense, so the most important thing is saved for last. So therefore, in the creation story, man is last. But in what sense is it ochar v'kedem? In what sense is it later and before? It was last in the actual construction, but first in God's design, first in the planning. So what does it mean zacha? What does it mean zacha? If a person merits, it means like this: if a person lives up to this ideal, if a person lives his life with an understanding of his centrality, an understanding of his importance, and lives accordingly, then we tell him that you're the first. If not the first in the order of the actual construction of the world, but first and foremost in God's plan. On the other hand, if you are not zoka, that means if you see yourself as an afterthought, then you are an afterthought. We tell you, in fact, you were the last. Whenever I come to this Rashi, it always dawns on me that most enlightened people today do see themselves this way, see themselves as afterthoughts, not as the tachlis, not as the objective. See, this is something which is very, very important to understand. Most people miss it. Ask the man on the street, the enlightened, educated man, what is the process by which man came to be? What's the answer?
Evolution.
Evolution. Okay? Evolution. In other words, man evolved from lower forms. It is a mistake to assume that evolution is a directed process. Evolution is not a process which is designed to produce man as the end product. Evolution, as evolutionary biologists understand it, is a undirected process. Meaning, as you have the lower forms, if the lower forms find themselves in hospitable environments, then they will thrive unchanged. If they find themselves in inhospitable environments, then it may be that certain creatures who mutate in advantageous ways will have an advantage, and through the process of natural selection, those populations will thrive. The populations which are unmutated will not thrive. And then you have, over the generations, over long periods of time, a certain type of adaptation and change and development, and ultimately, through a very, very laborious step-by-step process, you have lower forms evolving into higher forms. But it's totally not directed. It's totally not directed. And it may be, if you put a evolutionary biologist on the spot, he will tell you that if fate, if luck, if chance would have been a little bit different, and these lower forms would have found themselves in slightly different environments, maybe creatures would have evolved into even more advanced ways. Because it may be that we as human beings, we're proud of ourselves and we see ourselves as being very, very lofty, but maybe we are not even a fraction of what we could have been, because chance had it that our evolution was arrested at some stage, and really had we been in a different set of circumstances, we could have evolved into something more grand and more great, and so on and so forth.
Why would it be arrested?
What?
Why would it be arrested?
Because we never found ourselves in a situation where those advantageous mutations would have conferred a significant advantage. Right? If the environment would have been a little bit colder, a little bit hotter, a little bit this, a little bit that, then if there would have been predators of a certain type, right, we may develop differently. Right? So the truth is that to the evolutionist, man really is an afterthought. And he might not have been at all. Right? Had the lower forms found themselves again in a different set of circumstances, maybe there would have been no need for adaptation or any type of evolution, development. So really man is an afterthought. That's very humbling. And if you read the literature of people who espouse evolution, one thing does emerge from them, despite their arrogance. They are an arrogant lot, but they claim that reflection upon evolution is very, very humbling, which is itself a paradox. How arrogance and humility find themselves coupled together. But they talk about the idea of evolution being very, very humbling, because whereas the religious personality believes in focused creation, believes man as the pinnacle of all things, the evolutionist believes that we are really nothing more than an afterthought, just chance, just like a roll of the dice. It worked out that we're here, but otherwise you wouldn't have been here. To me, that's what Rashi is saying. Rashi is saying, Zocha. If you understand what the Torah is coming to tell you about human beings, Zocha, if you merit, then we tell you, you are first. You are first in God's design, in God's plan for the Bria. You were first. Again, as all important things. It's Sof Ma'asev Machshava Tchila. The thing which is conceived first is brought into existence last. But you are first and foremost in God's plan. But if lo zacha, if you don't buy into the Torah's vision of things, you are really the last. It's not just you're the last because in Parshas Bereishis, Parak Aleph, it says man is the last. You're the last because if you reject the biblical creation story, you really are the last. You are the end of an undirected process, which is total chance. And this has real consequences. by the way. This has real practical consequences. Let me explain this a little bit. I'm off on a tangent, but it's something we have to know. Let me bring it out this way. There is a very great debate, supposed debate, between science and religion, or religious people and scientific people. And each makes a claim to true wisdom, true knowledge. So people of religion, people of faith, say that on the basis of the Bible, we believe X, Y, Z. People of science say on the basis of our observations and experiments, we believe A, B, C. And there are seeming contradictions between what the people of faith say and what the people of science say. So the question is, how do you reconcile the conflict in science and religion? And there was a very famous essay that was written by a person who actually is an evolutionary biologist, not alive anymore, Stephen Jay Gould, wrote a famous essay where he proposed a resolution of the conflict, which is abbreviated by the acronym NOMA, which means non-overlapping magisteria. Now, a magisterium is a Latin term. It means the teaching authority of a church. The magisterium of the Catholic Church means the authority that the church has to establish doctrine for all its faithful followers. So he says like this, he says that science and religion have two different magisteria, two different teaching authorities. And as long as you prevent them from overlapping, then everything is fine. There is the realm which is the appropriate realm of science, and there is the realm which is the appropriate realm of religion. And you have to do your best to make sure they don't overlap. They should be non-overlapping magisteria, and as long as you do that, then everything is fine. So, he says, what is the tchum? What is the boundary of science, and what is the boundary of religion? The boundary of science deals with explaining the natural world as it is and how it got here. So science should have exclusive say over those issues. The description of the natural world and the description of its origins and basis. Religion should have complete domination over the question of how we should live our lives. Ethics, morality, and so on and so forth. And once each remains in its own boundary, then everything is fine. There'll be no conflict. Now, the essay seems to take the position, the odd position, that who has been guilty of overstepping the line? Not the men of science, rather the men of religion. In other words, it would be fine if the two boundaries were kept apart. But somebody is guilty of stepping over the line. Who's guilty? It's not the men of science, it's the men of religion. If anything, it seems to me, as the casual observer, that the people who are really guilty of this are the people of science. Now, the people of science seem to say that on the basis of their specialized knowledge, they can dictate and address questions of morality. So, for example, if you have a moral question of is euthanasia acceptable? And people are called to make these decisions every day. If you have a loved one in a hospital, end-of-life issues, this is almost unavoidable. Unavoidable in the way we die in the 21st century. There are going to be questions of euthanasia, passive euthanasia, active euthanasia, pulling the plug, removing life support. These are questions that are ma'asim b'chol yom, come up all the time. And doctors feel very confident in giving their advice and their suggestions, and more than suggestions. They really feel that they speak authoritatively. On what basis? Like, what is contained in their training that gives them any qualification to address an issue of the value of life? I don't know of it. Bob, in the medical school curriculum, is there anything that gives a person the qualification to address an issue like that? I think not. You've been through it? No. Okay. So here we have tested. Don't believe me. Here we have a man of the stethoscope. So the point is, so it seems to me, abortion, right? Does a fetus have a right to life? So all the people try to tell us that we're not going to be governed by superstition. We're going to be governed by science. Science is going to answer these questions. To me, again, it doesn't seem that science has any ability to address these issues. There's nothing that the body of scientific knowledge contains that gives us clarity on these issues as when life begins, etc. And yet, people of science routinely overstep the bounds. So this accusation that as people of religion overstep the line, right, is farcical. In other words, it's true that people of religion will make certain claims about the origin of the earth. But it seems to me again, as the casual observer, that the claims about science that men of religion make are relatively harmless. And the claims about morality that men of science make are of such consequence that we're talking about practical life and death issues. So who's guilty of overstepping the line? I think that Stephen Jacob made a mistake. But, yes?
How can men of faith make decisions about how a person should live without coming to some conclusion of how we arrive?
That's what I'm talking about. That's exactly what I want to make. But the point is that the entire enterprise of NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria, is misdirected. Because many of our moral positions are, in fact, rooted in our version of how things came to be. Because if you don't accept the creation story as it is, then many of our moral foundations are suspect. Well, let me give an example. I'll give you a benign example. There is a concept of private property. There's a concept of private property. We all understand if I own something, you shouldn't take it away. So our society is based on a respect for property rights. What gives us the right to private property? When the first human beings came into the world, and they found a world that was filled with all sorts of things, land and minerals and plants and so on and so forth, what gave them entitlement? Like first come, first serve? Like that's why that gives you a right, because you were there first? Now, let me put it this way. Maybe this will help us focus on the issue. In 1969, man landed on the moon. The first human beings walked on the moon. There was a question before the moon landing: would the United States stake a claim on the moon? Would they plant an American flag and say that we claim this in the name of the United States? The moon now belongs to the United States. Right? Now, the United States said, no, we're not going to do that. And therefore, to the contrary, they landed on the moon, they put up a plaque that says we came in the name of all mankind, which is very, very, very nice. But let's contemplate the counterfactual. Let's say they would have planted an American flag and say we're staking a claim, moon belongs to the United States. What would our response be? So we would laugh. So just because you got there first, you can stake a claim, it's yours. Well, how did anything become anybody's? How did property begin? Didn't it begin by somebody staking a claim on something that was owners? And then subsequently it's transferred and bought and sold and traded and bartered and stolen and conquered. But originally, how did it all start? How did the concept of property start? It must have been somebody staked a claim on something that was unknown. So why is that more outlandish than staking a claim on the moon?
The whole concept of colonialism set a precedent.
Well, and I'm saying the same thing. In other words, people would say, they raise the same objection to that. Because how could explorers from the old world come to North America and stake a claim? Now there's another problem there, that the Indians were there first, right? Which is a different problem. It happens to be, this is a very interesting thing. If you are American history buffs, there were a number of Supreme Court decisions in the United States in the 1800s to justify the claims of the white men against the Indians. And they were ingenious. I mean, totally off the wall, bizarre. But essentially, they took the position like this, that the Indians, since they were nomadic peoples, which wasn't even historically accurate, but since they were nomadic peoples, they didn't stake a claim on land. Because they never stayed in one place all the time. They always were wandering from here to there. And so to stake a claim means you have to be fixed in a location. So when the white men came from the old world, they staked claims that superseded the Indian claims. I mean, ingenious right?
There was some insight, though, that some Indian cultures did not have a concept of private property. They thought it was just...
Yeah, that may be. But the point is this. The point is that where does property come from? So, believe it or not, this became a question that political philosophers had to deal with. John Locke, in the second treatise on government, developed an amazing theory of how property ownership can be justified. And he said like this, he said that what justifies ownership is when you blend your labor into something, since your labor is yours, when you blend your labor into something, that thing becomes yours. So when you cultivate the land, it becomes yours because you are mixing your labor into the land. Since your labor is yours and you blended it into the soil, that makes the soil yours. So, one contemporary political philosopher says, well, what would that mean? If I would take a can of Coca-Cola that belongs to me and pour it into the Pacific Ocean, now it would become mine? Because I blended my my Coca-Cola into the Pacific Ocean. I mean, bizarre theories. The answer to this question is a very, very simple answer for a believing Jew. When God created man, He told him, "Pru u'revu, be fruitful and multiply, u'milu es haaretz, and fill the earth, v'kivshuha, and take possession of it." God, who is obviously the owner, gave man a directive: take possession of the earth. That is the basis of property. The basis of property is that the true owner empowered man to take possession of it. That gives him the right to property. That is the basis of property. And if you don't believe in that creation story, if you don't believe that there was an express directive from God to man, v'kivshua, take possession, now you're going to have to grapple with this problem of property, which is a very serious problem. Right? And maybe if you have no satisfactory answer, you know what you're going to say? You're going to say, maybe the right to private property is not as self-evident as we think it is. Maybe it's really only something which is part of the social contract, and it's only a right which the government grants you, and therefore if the government decides that let's spread the wealth, that's its prerogative. And the truth is that there are many, many people who really think in those terms. When you hear a political debate and you talk about tax cuts and you describe them as gifts to the rich, it means you've already missed the boat. Because you've totally forgotten that the taxes are what we give to the government, or the government takes from us, I should say, and tax cuts is not a gift that the government gives to us, it's that the government just takes less than it would have taken otherwise. But this confusion is because the very concept of property is very confusing, but it's only confusing because we reject the biblical account. If we believe the story as the Chumash tells us, then we know exactly where property came from. So to say, well, religion can talk about morality, but it should not talk about history, it should not talk about the process of creation, that's not going to work, because many of our moral positions are rooted in historical facts of the process of creation. Now, obviously the more important thing, the most critical issue is the relation of man to animals. In other words, we have a creation story where we believe that man was first in God's design, he is last in the process of creation, he is the pinnacle of creation, he is the tachlis, he is the purpose, he is the objective, and that gives him certain prerogatives over animals. It's also part of the divine directive. Milu es haaretz v'kivshua, take possession of the earth and conquer it, right? Uridu and rule b'dagas hayam v'of hashemayim v'chaya v'chol behema, and rule over fish, birds, animals. Because God tells men, you are the ruler. Now, the ruler, by the way, doesn't necessarily mean that he should abuse his rule. A king should not cannibalize his subjects. And that's why Adam Harishon was not allowed to eat meat. Why that changed is a long story. But the fact that, so what does it mean Urudu? In what sense was man meant to rule? The word says L'molacha. He could harness them for work. I mean, he's the king, he's the master, but God put limitations. There's also an idea of stewardship. You don't abuse your mastery. But our relationship to animals is really rooted in our version of the creation story. Well, once you reject the creation story, which creates this hierarchy of animals and human beings on the top, so then what? What is the superior position of human beings over animals? Is there any?
Might makes right.
Right? So, listen, let's assume that for a moment, because we're smarter. So since I'm smarter than a cow, I can eat a cow. I'm smarter than you. Can I eat you? No, I'm just joking. I'm facetious, right? Why not? Like, why not? Right? I mean, if being smarter than a cow gives me rights over the cow, so why not my being smarter than you gives it, right? Or you're being smarter than me, right? But obviously, it doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense. So, it's very interesting that many philosophers who are advocates of animal rights, right, have blurred the distinction of human beings and animals. So, for example, the utilitarians, who believe that the basis of all morality is the greatest good for the greatest number, good being defined as pleasure, bad being defined as pain, felt that what is the critical factor in morality is a being which is sentient. If you can feel, then we have to take that into consideration. It's not that human beings are unique because they can think. Human beings have to be treated a certain way because they can feel, but animals that can also feel have to be treated in the same way. And it becomes farce, right? When you see that the political campaign in the United States, the south of the border, what it is degenerating into, right? That Romney, the Republican candidate, transported his dog, in the kennel on top of the family station wagon 30 years ago, right? And the response from the Romney campaign is, well, at least our man didn't eat dog, right? You know, and President Obama in his autobiography, says when he was a child in Indonesia, he ate dog. So the question is, you know, what's worse? Is it worse to eat dog, or is it worse to transport dog on the roof of your car? You know, that's a very deep question. But it's farce. It's farce. Because this whole concern for the animal rights is rooted in a blurring of the distinction of the uniqueness of the human being. So when you have questions, for example, about the morality of performing experiments on animals to develop drugs and treatments for human beings, so to a Jew who learns Torah, understands Torah, it's no brainer, of course. That's the best use. What better use would there be of using animals to develop therapies to aid human beings? Of course, we're not talking about inflicting gratuitous pain. Right? You want to do it in a manner which is as considerate as possible. But the fact that you're sacrificing animals to better a lot of human beings is totally acceptable. And you'd be surprised how many people find this astounding. I remember years ago, when I lived in California, there was an experiment that was done in Loma Linda where they transplanted a baboon's heart into a child. And so one day on one of the talk radio shows, they announced that we're going to discuss this great moral issue of transplanting a baboon's heart into a human being. So I thought that the issue was going to be that, you know, introducing an animal organ into a human being may be corrupting the human being by giving him an animal's heart. So I was waiting to hear people speaking in that vein. And someone calls in and says, no, I'm totally opposed to this. Why? He says, how dare they sacrifice a perfectly healthy baboon for the sake of a sick child? That was enough to realize that there's a lot of confusion out there.
In New Zealand, several years ago, they tried to pass in the parliament to say that monkeys are humans also.
Yeah, no. That is a very, very controversial issue with the great apes. Should be viewed as semi-humans and should be given rights. It's not an easy question to settle. But in any case, the point is that the Torah gives us clarity. The Torah gives us clarity. And that's what Chazal are telling us over here, that we have to know that a human being is first in God's plan, in the conception, last in the carrying out. So therefore, as Chazal say, Zocha, the person merits if he understands what he is, then he can be proud of the fact that he's first and foremost. If he doesn't understand what he is, then he actually will see himself as last. Rabbi Eliezer takes this a step further, and he says that this explains a very difficult question in this parsha. Now, in the parsha of Yoledes, which talks about the purity and impurity associated with the childbearing woman, something is thrown in here. The mitzvah of bris milah is thrown in. It says, on the 8th day, the child is circumcised. Now, it's true that if you're talking about the sequence of events, it's true that after the first 7 days of the Yoledes, the 8th day is the bris. But thematically, bris milah doesn't belong in this parsha. Why is bris milah inserted here, where it seemingly doesn't belong? We've actually talked about this in past years. But Rabbi Eliezer says a very simple answer. He says, because the Torah wants to hint to us that why is man first and foremost in God's plan? Why is he so central? Why is he so important? The answer is because he is worthy of performing God's commands. And the body of command is symbolized by bris milah. Bris milah is the most fundamental command. So therefore it's inserted here because this is the justification. This is why man is, in fact, the tachlis habriya because of his performance of mitzvahs. So this is really an overview to the order of the parsha. We have a few minutes. I'd like to talk about saras, which is really the subject of the bulk of the two parshias, which is saras. And Chazal tell us that saras is a punishment for the sin of lashon hara specifically. There are other aveiros for which saras also comes, but the real primary sin is the sin of lashon hara. And the second parsha is Metzora. Chazal find a hint in the very word Metzora. Metzora means motzi shem ra, the person who slanders another person. That's what saras comes for. And the question is, no, there are many sins in the Torah. There are many, many sins in the Torah. Why is saras sent specifically for this sin of lashon hara? Chazal that Rashi quotes seems to emphasize the idea that lashon hara is a social sin. It undermines the fabric of society. Because we are meant to be integrated. We're meant to work together, to cooperate, to coexist. Because lashon hara tears the bonds of connection. When we slander one another, we can't get along. We become contentious. Parents and children, children and parents, teachers and students, students and teachers, co-workers. Everything is severed. All ties are broken. And that is the damage that the Baal Lashon Hara causes. One of the consequences of saras is that the person has to live in isolation. Right? Right? We know that Tameim, people that are impure, are sent out of various machanas. A Tamei Meis is sent out of the machana Shechina, the innermost camp, the temple itself. The Zov is sent out of the machana Leviya, outside the entire Temple Mount. But Metzora is sent out of 3 camps. He can't even live in the machana Yisrael. He can't live in the encampment with other Jews. That's defined generally as walled cities. A walled city, which is a place that allows for a concentration of human beings, there the Metzora can't be. Now, the open city, there you're talking about suburban sprawl. In suburbia, you have very little connection to your neighbors. The walled city, because it's contained, it's constricted, you have a much higher concentration of people. That's where the Metzora can't be, because the Metzora corrupts the entire social network. So therefore it makes perfect sense. It's a social sin, and therefore it brings isolation. That's the connection. See, there may be another aspect to it, which is this. Communication is the unique human function. It is that which makes us human beings. Onkelos, the famous Targum Onkelos, says in Parshas Bereshis, when God created man, and it says that He fashioned him from the earth. Vayipach be'apav nishmas chayim, blew into him the breath of life. Vayihi adam nefesh chaya, man became a living being. Onkelos translates nefesh chaya not as living being, but ruach memalolai. He became a speaking being. Man became a speaking being. That is the unique characteristic of human beings. Human beings can communicate. Now the truth is this. The truth is animals also communicate. But it's not the same level. Whatever you need to know in terms of know-how as an animal, it is part of your makeup. There's how to be a cow, how to be a horse, how to be a honeybee. You don't need to be trained. The bees may have to communicate where the flowers are, where the pollen is. But how to be a bee, that they know instinctively. Human beings have a lot to learn. Now, to function as a human being means you have to learn this from your parents, from your environment, from your surroundings. there has to be communication. Without communication, you can't develop as a human being. So communication is the essence of our humanity. The Metzora corrupts that which is the most fundamental aspect of being a human being. He corrupts the power of speech. Chazal say that a Metzora chashuv kameis. In the eyes of the Torah, a person who's a Metzora might as well be dead. And it's a very interesting thing. The tzaras of the flesh is a white patch of skin. And white, of course, is always a symbol of death. Right? The Gemara says that if a person embarrasses someone else, it's as if he was shofech damim, as if he shed blood. Why? The ozel sumka ba'asi chivra. Because you embarrass a person to the point that he turns white, so the red disappears and the white comes, and that means you essentially killed him. Meaning, living things have the blood circulating, they're red, right? Someone who's pale as a ghost, that's tantamount to being dead. Metzora Chazal says choshev kameis. And the fact that his skin turns white shows that it symbolizes death. Why is it death? It's because you've lost your justification for existence. Since you've corrupted that which is most fundamental, there's no point in living. There's no point in living as a human being, at least. Maybe as an animal, but as a human being, there's no point in living if you've corrupted that fundamental faculty of speech. And that's why tzaras is so central. So much attention is devoted to it. Right? Not that we understand these parshias. The symbolism is very complex. The laws are very complex. But this much we have to know, that speech is that which makes us human beings. If we corrupt that power of speech through lashon hara, through gossip, through sheker, through false words, then really we might as well not be alive. Because we have forfeited our justification for existence. That is the idea of Metzora chashuv kameis. That is really the centrality of these parshias. In the weeks we read these parshias, it's worthwhile to think a little bit about how we can improve in this area. And many of us mistakenly believe that the way to improve is to remain silent. That's the solution. If we just don't talk, then we'll be safe. The truth is that the Zohar says an amazing thing. In Parshas Metzora, it says that the person who has tzaras is purified in a ritual where there are two birds. One bird is slaughtered and one bird is sent away. So the Zohar says like this: why two birds? Now, birds that chirp are talkative. So he says like this: the bird that is slaughtered, that bird is slaughtered for the sin of having said things that one should not say. If a person said lashon hara, he said gossip. So it's a terrible thing. So the slaughter of that bird is an atonement for the sin of having said things that one should not say. The bird that is sent away, that is an atonement for the sin of not having said things that should be said. So we send the chirping bird out, that symbolizes the liberation of speech. That's also an avera. Not saying the things that should be said. The atonement for that is sending the mishulacha, sending the other bird away. That means that we have to find a balance. There's certain things we shouldn't say. That's a terrible avera. And sometimes holding ourselves back from saying the things we should say is also an avera. The correct solution to the problem of lashon hara is not to remain silent. No, you have the right to remain silent. But anything you don't say can and will be used against you. You have to speak when you have to speak. And for that, it's important to know the halachas, know the din. That's really the only solution. The only solution is to know what you can say. Baruch Hashem, there are wonderful svarim in every language, Hebrew, English, that discuss the laws of lashon hara. You have books that are very complex, books that are very simple. You even have books nowadays that are written as comics. If you just like looking at the pictures, you can do that too. We have everything. But it's worthwhile to get a hold of these books and begin to learn the dinim, learn the halachas of Lashon Hara, what one can say. And the Chavetz Chaim, of course, did trailblazing work in this area. It's hard to imagine that we're talking about works that are just barely 100 years old. How did Klal Yisrael survive for so many centuries without such svarim? But the Chavetz Chaim svarim were trailblazers. That they created an entire Shulchan Aruch of the halachas of Lashon Hara, exactly what a person can say, what a person can't say, and you have situations. It's virtually every day. Someone calls you up and asks you a question about a shidduch. Is this person an appropriate person for that person? So what are you going to say? You know that there are some very serious flaws that this person may have that would create a great doubt as to the person's marriageability. So what are you going to do? Say nothing? Maybe you'll be an accomplice in forming a bad marriage. What are you going to say? Say something? Maybe it isn't justified. Maybe it is Lashon Hara. Maybe you shouldn't say it. But you have to know. You have to know. The Chavetz Chaim gives very, very, very detailed guidelines for how to respond to questions about shidduchim. It's a very serious question. It's a very serious question. And, you could have, I'm in the yeshiva business, right? So it's important for us to get information about prospective students, right? The more we know about a student, the more we're able to deal with that student's needs. So we speak to teachers, we speak to principals, we speak to parents, we speak to the students themselves. How do you know what to say? How do you know what not to say? In schools, I have to tell you, the teacher's room is a very dangerous place. A teacher has a hard morning, he comes in and he vents his frustration. Oh, what a day did I have. You're not going to believe what happened in class today. And he tells a story, and it's a very funny story, everyone has a good laugh. But on the other hand, what give you the right to tell a story? You're frustrated, so therefore everyone has to know about this particular student. Maybe he's going to be in the other teacher's class next year. And the teacher's going to have a bad attitude about him from the outset, because he remembers a year ago, his previous year's teacher told the story about it. Says, what's the justification for that? There are many people that think that Lashon Hara is to husbands and wives. There's no Isser of Lashon Hara. Where would such an outlandish idea have come from? I have to tell you an amazing story. I won't even tell you the people involved. I may show you people involved. Anyway, I'll tell you just, I forgot. There was a certain yeshiva where there was terrible, terrible machlokes in the yeshiva. There was a dispute between the Rosh Yeshiva, and it was a situation that the whole world knew about. It was just awful, just terrible. The whole yeshiva was polarized, and some of the students sided with one Rosh Yeshiva, and the other students sided with the other Rosh Yeshiva, and so on and so forth. There was a Yid who was a Rebbe in that yeshiva. And this Yid was a big, big tzaddik, a tremendous tzaddik. In fact, people called him the Chavetz Chaim of America. He was such a big tzaddik. And he was a Rebbe in the yeshiva, and he managed over decades to remain outside of this machlokes, uninvolved, unaffected, and didn't take sides, and he minded his own business, and there's no problem. Once, his wife, the wife of his tzaddik, was at a wedding, and she's sitting next to other women who are very familiar with the political situation in that yeshiva. And the woman, the wife of this tzaddik, says, my husband is so happy teaching in this yeshiva. Because she hears that other yeshivas, there's machlokes, there are arguments, there's fights, people don't get along, right? And my husband is so happy, he comes home, and everything is wonderful, everything is peaceful, everything is fine, right? And there's no machlokes, it's such a wonderful thing. This yeshiva was the worst yeshiva in terms of machlokes. It was like the absolute worst. It was like the whole world knew it, right? But not this person's wife, right? He never came home and says, oh, you're not going to be what happened today, the fights, the arguments, so on and so forth. He came home every day. He was happy. How's everything? It's wonderful. Baruch Hashem. Everyone gets along, and everyone's doing well, and it's great. And what does she have to know for? Well, it's her business that there's a machlokes in the yeshiva, in the two Rosh yeshiva. Why does she have to know? That was exactly the point. There was no need to talk about it. So he came home. They found other things to talk about. That's an amazing thing. Imagine you're married to someone for decades, right? And you're working in a place, and there's all sorts of issues, and you never come home and you never tell us what's going on. So Baruch Hashem, we have such people in the world. It's not alive anymore, I should say. Baruch Hashem, we have such people in the world. But this is something we have to know. We have to know what is right to say and what is wrong to say. And it's important to learn the halachas. If you learn the halachas, then you'll say the things that should be said, you'll avoid the things that shouldn't be said, and then you'll be able to achieve your fundamental humanity. You'll be able to live up to the promise of what it means to be a human being with the power of speech, and avoid saras. The Zohar HaKadosh says that the rearrangement of the word saras is atzeres. Atzeres is a gathering. Shmini Atzeres means the 8th day of gathering. We gather together. So it could be saras or it could be atzeres. The Zohar says that the word nega, if you rearrange, is oneg. Oneg means delight. Oneg is pleasure. So life can either be a nega, it can be a plague, or it could be oneg, it could be delight. Right? The Sefer Yetzirah says there's nothing better than oneg, nothing worse than nega. But it's sort of the same letters. It's all the same. And the question is really, it all depends on us. It all depends on what we say, how we say it, to whom we say it, and we have the choice to really improve the qualities of our lives, and it can make a big difference. So this is a week which is very auspicious for thinking about these things. Hopefully, the Baruch Hashem should give us much success in achieving these ideals. Thank you for listening.